The Copyright Office took a position: if there's human involvement, then it is copyrightable. Otherwise, if it's pure AI, it's not copyrightable. So what do you think of that ruling?
If there's sufficient human involvement, if there's creative selection, coordination, arrangement of material, then you should be able to copyright that. Let's say an artist brought you a track and they went to like a ChatGPT, right? And they said, hey, I want a song that's kind of in this particular vibe. They copy and paste that, they disclose that that's how they created it. What would your advice be, I guess, to artists to ensure that they can have copyright protection?
Hello and welcome. I'm Alan Jacobi, and I've had the privilege of working as an entertainment attorney for over 40 years. Throughout my career, I've witnessed the evolution of the industry from vinyl records to digital streaming. I've been fortunate to be involved in hundreds of recording agreements, and I've had the honor of representing artists, record labels, publishers, and virtually every facet of the music business, and have earned nearly 50 gold and platinum records. One of the highlights of my career was guiding Two Live Crew through their landmark U.S. Supreme Court case, a well-known copyright and parody case that's featured in many law school textbooks. I've had a variety of issues. Today, I would like to welcome Alex Mitchell, the founder of Boomy and CEO. Let's hear from you, Alex.
Thanks, Alan, and I really appreciate you having me on. At Boomy, we build generative music systems, is what I would say. Some people would call it AI music. Some people would call it generative music. I'm sure we'll get into those definitions a little later in the conversation. We've been at it for a long time. We've been at it since 2019. Over the years, millions of consumers, but also professionals and businesses all over the world have used Boomy's technology to create tens of millions of original songs, everything from whimsical social media songs to professional use by some of the world's top producers, especially recently. And pretty much that whole time, as you know, we've been in the center of a conversation about copyrightability and about copyright. We've been actively engaging with the Copyright Office since 2019, and I think that's what brings me here today. Talk about some of the recent guidance and some of the fun drama going on in that universe.
Yep. Okay, so the Copyright Office took a position after you and what was the publisher? I forgot.
Pure Music. Yeah.
Had approached them for just such an opinion. The opinion was very interesting because it says if there's human involvement, I think that the word that they used was significant, which I don't know what that means really, human involvement, then it is copyrightable. Otherwise, if it's pure AI, it's not copyrightable. So what do you think of that ruling? That opinion.
I would love to think that they issued the whole opinion just because of our comments. I think, but what here? Why don't I give you a little bit of the history here, right? Because I think that's helpful. There's been a lot of focus on their recent guidance, but there's many years of engagement. Obviously, not just from us, from many different players on these topics. They're super important. So let me give you a bit of history. In 2019, really right when we started, we went to the Copyright Office. There was an event. We held a panel. I don't know that it was the first, but certainly one of the earliest panels on this topic. And we had pulled, or the Copyright Office had pulled together a bunch of songwriters. This is actually still on YouTube if you want to go find it somewhere. And pulled together a bunch of songwriters and me and a representative from the Copyright Office. And we had this interesting discussion where the songwriters, and I'm a musician, I'm a songwriter as well. An important part of what we pointed out is that algorithmic creation is musical, has a history. There's a musical history to this, going all the way back to Mozart's Dice Game and Schoenberg, more modern, Brian Eno and Steve Reich, Philip Glass, Terry Riley, maybe even more modern than that, Aphex Twin, Radiohead, Grimes. There's tons of musicians who use, let's call it, varying forms of automation to create music, and that has always enjoyed copyright protection. I don't think there was a huge I don't think there was very much disagreement, at least over that point, that, hey, musicians are going to use varying forms of automation. In general, that would be copyrightable because it's a musician. They're using these different forms of automation. But then we got into, AI. And, AI really just means automation, in my mind anyway. And what AI has meant and the methodologies involved has changed quite a bit, even from 2019 to today. And so when you fast forward from that 2019 era, where the algorithms were largely inspired by, let's call it past composers, past musical aspects of musical expression, even on the sort of programming side, to more modern forms of AI, there was this new guidance that the Copyright Office issued in 2023, and it was kind of it was a little unclear. We'll put it that way.
Sure.
Like I do know, I think they did a lot of work, and I think there were really a lot of smart people who tackled this question, but it kind of started to establish this idea of AI generated content as being distinct, this own sort of new unique category, right? As being distinct from, I guess you would call human created content or whatever, right? And that guidance in 2023 went as far as to suggest that they would deny, or not suggest, I think they did deny, in the image universe, somebody had created something that was like a visual output from an AI system, and then they changed it, they made edits to it, but even those edits were not enough in the office's view to say that that was they didn't give it copyright protection, right? So that has pretty big implications. We saw that as being pretty new of an idea, a little bit different from some of the things we were discussing in 2019. And so there was this comment period, right? They opened it up to the universe of interested parties to submit comments. I think according to their report, they saw like 10,000 of these comments come through.
Wow.
And, in those comments, there were, I think if you were to generalize, there's a lot of AI companies, right? And
Sure.
they're taking a certain set of positions. There's a lot of traditional media companies, including record labels, including publishers, including ASCAP, PROs, and they have sort of a set of positions. And we decided to do something a little unusual, which was submit joint comments with Peer Music, which is a 100-year-old music publishing company,
Sure.
and say, look, this everybody's got a lot of opinions here, but here's what we think, right? Here are some of the areas we agree on. We focused on the definitions of AI. So kind of what I just said, like what is it that we mean when we say AI generated? How and what is the distinction there? And also just on a broad category that I would call creator rights, AI creator rights. If musicians want to use AI in their material, they should probably feel safe that they can use that and that they can enjoy copyright protection. And so there was a really, I have to give credit to the Pure Music team. Like, they did a great job. And we submitted these comments, and I was happy to see that out of those 10,000 comments, ours were referenced a handful of times. I think 4 or 5 times throughout the guidance, and we, they were. I would say the needle moved, right? The needle moved from an unclear sort of set of, well, what does that mean, to these pretty declarative statements from the office that say, if there's sufficient human involvement, if there's creative selection, coordination, arrangement of material, that's their phrase, and that's I think one of the phrases that we used, then you should be able to copyright that. And of course, I agree with that. They draw the line at prompts. There's still some unanswered questions, but I was really happy to see the office recognize that there is this new emerging class of AI enabled creators in the music domain and the image domain, and that's something that deserves protection.
I agree. I go a little further, I think, than you do in terms of that, and that's that I think prompts, particularly if they're super detailed, prompts are uttered by a musician who's talking about, like a walking bass line, and I want it to be, how many beats per minute, and I want it to be, the more information that person submits, I think is closer to making it his, that he created it. And it should be copyrightable. something you push a button and out comes music, no, I get that. But if it's something that was actually created through the prompts, then I disagree with the Copyright Office, and I think that should be copyrightable.
Well, and that's, yeah, and that's why, ultimately, I think I was joking with you before, this is a great time to be a copyright attorney. Like if I needed to change careers, that's probably where I would go, because, ultimately, correct me if I'm wrong here, it kind of sounds like they're still going to treat these registrations as being case by case.
I agree.
Right?
Yes, so, unfortunately, because they were so vague.
Right. So if it's case by case, then if it's case by case, but prompts aren't copyrightable, but if the output of a prompt is edited and changed and rearranged, then that's probably fine on on a case by case.
Right. Music added to it, or music subtracted, or some, like they say, substantial change or modification, better word, to that output would be copyrightable. But as I said, I believe it should go back further. I believe it should be that somebody, particularly a musician who can, pick the key, can, reference chords and can do all that sort of stuff. It's like a keyboard player playing horn lines. They're not really, they're keyboard lines, but they sound like horn lines, and that's fine. Nobody has a problem with that. So, to me, a really detailed prompt could prove to be substantial.
Interesting. And is that some of the guys, and like, are you, let's say, so, an artist brought you a track and they said, for example, I used one of these, like a push button, type software, or what if, they used a detailed prompt, but it's somebody who's not musical, and they went to like a ChatGPT, right? And they said, hey, I want a song that's kind of in this particular vibe. They copy and paste that, they disclose that that's how they created it. I mean, can't we get into weird cases here where,
absolutely,
it's going to be, what would your advice be, I guess, to artists to ensure that they can have copyright protection?
I would always go for it. In other words, that sounds substantial to me. Going to Chad, discussing the various parts, prompting those parts, and creating, to me, that was creation. They created whatever came out of the AI. The AI just followed directions. So, to me, without the human, you don't have the AI music.
I mean, I think I definitely agree with you on that point, and it's hard to know, what is AI generated, right? I think is still a confusing topic. Something we wrote a lot about in our comments.
It's really
like, what is it
generated through AI.
Well, right. Like, is there? It just makes sense to me that there are AI generated songs that are made by people, and so what about what about that?
Well, again,
I don't know. Is there any historical precedent for this? Is there any
comes out, and I had nothing to do with it other than the button? Then I can see their position. They're saying it's not human involvement. But when it's detailed prompts, including key and notes and horn lines and whatever, then I think it becomes a creation of that person. So, just like the horn lines through a keyboard.
Well, and horn line. There's a couple of different things I want to bring up. Horn lines through a keyboard reminds me a lot of kind of like the role of the engineers and the musicians, in the process.
Absolutely.
Because people bring up, and this is actually in the recent guidance as well. This idea that I think they said they prompted an image generator for like a cat or something, or like a picture of a cat, and that same prompt produced different images of the cat, and they're saying, well, that shows that the prompt does not have sufficient
because it was just a prompt.
Sufficient control.
They didn't. What if they said type of cat and the color and a position?
I would
And, they go in great detail and where it's sitting and, surroundings. And now it's not a simple prompt.
But see, I could
Yeah,
train you a model, or I could create an image model that, if you ask it for a cat, only produces pictures of dogs, right? I'm just saying, this is an example I bring up all the time. You could you could train a music model that says every time somebody types in "I want classical music," it produces death metal. You could do that. You know what I mean? Like the AI
yeah,
model is not some sort of sentient being.
of course.
It's a reflection of its training data and what a person has contributed. So in 2019, the algorithms that we launched then and the ones that are on Boomy.com today, these are what we would call generative algorithms, right? We didn't train them on lots of content. These are sort of this pure generative approach. It was built very much by musicians, at Boomy. And a long time ago, you and I had a conversation about that with that methodology, right? Where
Right.
I said, your question, I cite you all the time about this actually. Your question to me was, why wouldn't that be copyrightable? Like, it is not fundamentally different from what these other, producers and musicians would do. Now that we have this other type of model that exists in the universe, these latent diffusion models that do this training, one of the sides of this conversation that I don't think is happening is, if human intervention or if human involvement is sufficient for a copyright, what about the humans who create the model, right? And
Exactly.
so if I can create you a model that produces, a dog when you ask it for a cat, is that does that not confer some sort of, like, this is getting kind of out there, but I'm curious for your opinion on this. Like what if the user just sat back and pressed a button, but and then you wanted to see copyright protection for it, and you had an argument that said, well, no, there was all this other human involvement. I don't know, like, do you think it extends that far?
I do. I do. I'll tell you why. Because somebody created AI to start with, and it started with a person. And I think the involvement from the coders on up is human involvement. And I think that, I don't know if you recall, but early on, I did an agreement for you, for Boomy, that said that the coders are like musicians, and with a work for hire, they're giving the company the copyright.
Right.
And I still
Yeah,
think,
to like those sets of musical ideas. Yeah.
yeah, and I still think that's correct. I still think that's real. But
Do you,
obviously the Copyright Office doesn't. But maybe they weren't really presented with the kind of detail for that possible to do that, and might once again move the needle. So
yeah, I mean,
we'll
we'll
see.
see. I'm, in terms of how we use these new models, right? These, let's, prompt based latent diffusion models. We have a product that we, if it's okay to
Of
plug
course it is.
plug the product.
Of course it is.
We have a product that we released late last year. It's called LoopMagic. It's available at loopmagic.com. It uses some of this technology. It doesn't create, let's call it fully completed tracks. It creates loops. It creates one shots. It creates samples. We trained it in partnership with a Grammy-winning legend named Illmind, who is a leader in the loops and sample space in general. And obviously, the model results sound incredible. They sound really great because we trained it using, really solid data from a great producer. And, prior to this guidance, there was, I think, still some, maybe a tiny bit of open question if somebody is producing, a loop with that. And we get this question, right? If somebody produces, they prompt a loop, and to your point, they're using musical terminology. They're saying, I want a trap beat that's X, BPM, that's at
Sure.
a certain, has a certain vibe, and they're using natural language to create that. And then they pull it into a DAW, right? They pull it into a production system, and they're creating a song. They're adding vocals to it. I don't think there's any. Can you just confirm for me? I don't think there's any question, even with this guidance, that would be considered copyrightable. That is
Absolutely.
probably safe, right?
I
Because we got a lot of questions on the 2023 guidance from people saying, "Hey, these are really great, but like, does this ruin my copyrightability here? And can I even use the product for that reason?"
shouldn't. I mean, I've been in the recording studio where the producer basically tells the sidemen exactly what he wants them to play. So what's the
Sure.
difference? because the guy's sitting there playing guitar or bass or drums, even though he was given specific instructions of what the producer was looking for and just doing it, there was never any question that that's copyrightable. Ever.
Sure.
So I don't really see a difference. I just see a resistance, but that resistance, I believe, is going to fall.
And where do you think that resistance is coming from? What,
It's
like,
coming from-
why do you think?
It's historic. I think I mentioned to you that when pay TV, HBO, announced they were going to launch on cable for subscription, you can watch these great movies at home, the studios went crazy and set up tables in the lobbies of theaters with a banner that said "Fight Pay TV," because they thought it was going to destroy the movie industry, which, of course, the opposite happened. When VCR came about, the major studios said, we're not going to license our movies. We don't want people to be able to watch these movies at home. And then they realized it was a huge revenue stream, and we got Blockbuster. At the very beginning, Spotify was denied licensing by all the
That's
major
true.
labels.
Everybody forgets about that now. Yeah.
Because they said, oh, it's going to cheapen music. If you can, for $9.99 a month, you can have all you can eat. Who's going to go ever buy music? Well, it turned out to save the music industry.
Right. Right.
Streaming is the most important aspect of music today, period.
Sure.
So that's why they're afraid.
And I would say, and look, I think the conversation we're not having, it's a different facet of the conversation. I don't even think we need to talk about it much because I think you and I agree on this. I think everybody agrees on this, that the use of copyrighted, material, under current law, if you were to train with copyrighted material, you need a license for that. I think that's the similar parallel. Yeah. And that's what like everybody else is talking about. I've been on this other thing about I mean, I think it's unclear, but I think that my understanding of it is very much that if you're going to train using somebody's copyright, you should pay for that copyright.
Without I believe that.
Including our own music. I mean, we are, close to 100% sure that some of these models that exist out there have trained using our music and the music that our users have created and things like that. So I sometimes joke we have no friends, right? Like the AI companies, we're kind of like, hey, you have to license our data too,
Sure.
if you want to, because we have a copyright. And on the other side, you have this opposing force that says that none of this stuff, should be copyrightable at all. So I guess it's still. So I think the resistance, right? If you want to call it that, they still want to. They would still want to draw this line, and you see it in the report. You see it like there's this worry about replacement. There's this worry about I can't name the name, but I can say that a very high profile producer. Maybe I shouldn't share. I'll share the story. I probably shouldn't, but I'm going to share the story. A high profile producer basically told us through they were using the product. They were using LoopMagic, right? Or we were demoing it. It was being demoed for them, and they said, no. They reacted to it, very negatively, not because the outputs were bad, but because the outputs were too good. like that was literally what he said. That was literally what he said. He's like, nah. He's like, if I use that, he's like, you don't need me anymore if you're using this. And of course we would say, well, look, like you are somebody who creates, loops. You're somebody who can guide this, draw really great outputs out of this AI system. But I think there's such a big narrative out there about like AI replacing humans, AI generated, music versus human. I don't even know what the other thing would be. Do you think there's any universe in which there is an AI generated content? Like, what would you? I think we've focused a lot on like what the human input is, right? But where's that line? Or where does that line exist for you? I guess.
If it's something that came solely from the technology with no human input other than the coding, that would be difficult.
Sure.
But I don't think that's what the future holds. I think the future is people are going to learn how to use AI for themselves, for the music they want to create as a tool. And that's going to be perfectly copyrightable, legal, even maybe wonderful. I don't see anything wrong with it.
And certainly that's what we see our users doing, especially now that we're being adopted a lot more into studios because we have these very high quality models. I'm excited about it. I still like to nerd out on, on like, I'm still trying to answer that question for myself, honestly, on like, what does it mean to create an AI generated song? I mean, not to derail us too much here, but one of the examples I like to use, I'm curious for your take on this, is with photos, right? Like smartphone cameras.
Right.
Because a lot of time I'll get in these debates with people and they'll say, oh, well, all you did was press a button, or you didn't, the technology did all the work. And if the technology is doing all the work, then that's an AI generated, blank video, photo, music, whatever. And I always ask them, well, have you ever taken a photo with a smartphone, right? And they would say, yes, I have. And then I'm trying to trap them, and I say, great, is that an AI generated photo? And it's like, no, that's just a photo. It's like, well, I'm going to be annoying and nerdy and say, actually, modern smartphone cameras have many layers of AI processing that image. You probably positioned the camera and you took you pressed one button to create that thing. You are not seeing, generally speaking, the light that was reflected in that room. You're seeing a composite image of tons and tons and tons of different images that your camera took of that room, optimized, and then generated through AI. I mean, in every meaningful way, generated through AI.
Yeah.
An image that then goes on your camera. So why wouldn't that be, an AI generated photo? I would even take this a step further into conspiracy lands. Don't we like conspiracies on podcasts, right? Where there's all these people on Reddit. There's like these researchers on Reddit who did this. You can Google this. They did this series of experiments with a like a Samsung. I can't remember the specific model, but the specific model of Samsung camera. And they were able to prove, I think, using a blurry photo of the moon, that the camera was actually generating like information in pixels and density that wasn't present. And the way it was weird. The way they did this is a next level moon conspiracy. They set up an intentionally blurry picture of a moon on a screen, right? Yep. So like the actual moon in this example is super, super blurry. As they put their Samsung camera on it, all of a sudden they got this rich, perfect image of the moon. So there's no way, right, that camera could be giving you an accurate picture of the moon unless it had an AI system that was doing improvement and generating things that weren't there.
Yeah.
So
you knew what the moon was supposed to look like.
Yeah, exactly. And you can imagine
previous pictures.
Yeah, and you can imagine the brilliant, programmer, right, who figured this out at Google and said, hey, people like taking pictures of the moon. They're always blurry because it's a faraway object, right?
Right.
It's hard thing to take a picture of. We have AI that can process that, and I can take that picture. We can make people's moon pictures better. The moon is only going to look one way. Right. And, then there's this question that I think this research created, which is like, well, what else are they doing that for, right? What other objects are actually not present in these images that are getting generated? And there's this whole discussion about it. But I just bring that up to show that, like, in every meaningful way, and especially how it was defined in the 2023 guidance, these photos that we're taking are AI generated photos. And if you were to copyright that photo with the Copyright Office, you would have to what do you have to disclose the use of AI, that your phone camera had AI in it? Like, I don't think that's what anybody wants.
Yeah, and I think most people don't know. They have no idea that their phones utilize AI to clarify the pictures they're taking.
Right. But it definitely doesn't. I don't know. I don't think that should impact. Maybe that impacts copyrightability. Maybe it doesn't. I mean, if somebody brought you that photo of the moon and said, and this is a stupid example, but it was like, hey, I need to copyright this. do you think that would get challenged on the basis that
No.
it's AI generated?
No, not at all, because I don't think anybody gives it a second thought. I know tons of photographs that are taken with iPhones and Samsungs that do get copyrighted.
Right.
So is it because they don't know, or is it because they don't feel it's encroaching on anybody's rights? That's the fear that I think they're harboring. I think they're afraid that people are going to lose control or keep safe their created content. And that's not going to happen, I don't think, at all.
Right. Particularly on the fair use question.
Yeah, which, I did the Two Live Crew case, which was fair use, which went up to the Supreme Court of the United States. And I believe that there's room for growth there, but not that much as what some of these companies are claiming. We have millions of recordings or hundreds of thousands of sounds, recordings, and from all those different sources, we're creating something new. That's a little far-fetched to me.
What do you think is far-fetched about that? I want to double click on that.
All of those items, all of those pieces were copywritten, were created by people. And I don't know if there's ever be a technology that can pick out each bit and pay all those contributors. But I would think if it existed, that's what should be done.
I definitely tend to agree. And I don't know. I mean, obviously the regulatory environment around this stuff is shifting almost daily, but I don't know if you saw, Sam Altman's comments recently where he says, I'm curious for your take on this, on the fair use question, where he said, so there was similar to what we did with the Copyright Office, there was recently a comment period on AI in general, right? Not really focused on music, not really focused on media, just general AI. And I want to make sure I'm getting this right, but generally there were all these articles about how OpenAI, I think the pull quote was, to train those models, if you have to pay for copyright, then it's quote unquote over, right? Because China, because other territories, right, do not have the same kind of copyright protections that we have here.
None.
And they have none, which means that they can kind of train whatever they want and not pay anybody. And while we're over here, having these long debates about licensing, about how to pay for this stuff, other countries just don't have to follow those rules, and then they can export these models into territories that technically probably aren't infringing if they use those models, because they're not doing the training, they're not doing the infringing, right? It's still very murky. But what do you think about the geopolitical nature of this? I think right now everybody's afraid that our president is just going to create some sort of executive order or create some sort of decree that says, well, this is all over, right? It's fine, just go ahead and use copyright. So what do you think about that, and what do you think would happen if that were the case?
They may be able to create it in China, but I think they're not going to be able to bring it here because we would prosecute, I believe. It's like Chinese-made movies, funded films. All the music has to be cleared, and they want to show those movies in the United States. And let's face it, we're a big market.
Sure.
So I think if we, it's like Louis Vuitton purses, made in China, brought over, we stop it. You know, I think the same thing will happen with the Chinese make movies and don't clear the music and try to show it here, shut it down. So as long as we maintain copyright, I think it's viable.
Sure.
Because of how big a market the United States is and how important it is. So we shall see.
Do you think that should, I'm just going out on a limb here, do you think that should impact the copyright ability? I mean, one of the ways you could, I'm just thinking out loud here. Yeah. One of the ways that you could control that is by saying that if you used I don't know, you could make up a rule that basically said if you use a non-licensed model, or if you use a model, then you can't that's been legally trained, let's call it,
Yeah.
then that does not get protection. I don't know. That's one method of enforcement.
Right. Well, if
Would
they
you be
make
in
a
favor
film
of
and
that,
make
or?
these hit songs and they haven't cleared those songs, that movie's not coming here.
Right.
So same thing would be true of TV shows, just about anything. If you want to come to America, you have to abide by our laws. And copyright is one of them.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I could talk about that for another 2 hours, but
I don't think
we should probably.
Right.
I feel like we should probably rein it back to copyrightability or any other remarks before we close.
Well, I think that these tools like Boomy are going to proliferate, like your loop thing, your LoopMagic. I think it'll be available to garage musicians before we know it. And so it's going to affect everybody in the music industry. And we need to sort of come up with rules, come up with what will work. Instead of saying we don't need to change anything, we certainly do. That's how I feel. I've been doing this stuff for 50 years.
Sure. So you would disagree with the office's, conclusion that no new rules are needed. We can kind of do that. Like, you think there needs to be clearer guidelines.
Yeah. Crazy. Doesn't make sense. I mean, there were no sync rights until there was talkie movies, sound movies. And they said, oh, well, you can't use that song if it's synced to a visual unless you get clearance. And unlike mechanicals, clearance requires 100% of the writers to agree, or the control of that song to agree. And that didn't exist because sound motion pictures didn't exist. So, and when they did, they came up with a rule. They came up with a law. And we need to do that now.
Well, I hope if there's some kind of working group or some sort of expert panel that you would be, I would heavily endorse your involvement on that, because I think that I think there are so many people who aren't thinking about this in such a thoughtful way.
Yeah, no, they're closed. Once again, I think it's historic, it's new, we don't understand it, so we're going to outlaw it. So it's happened before and it's going to happen again.
Yeah, it gets outlawed and then everybody creates new rules and everybody follows those rules.
Right. So it's about the legal authority of the Copyright Office to accept or deny copyrights. That's their job.
Let's say you were arguing, this case or a case that was something like this. Play it out for me how the guide, because I've been confused about what is the difference between guidance from the Copyright Office and the law, right? Because this is a report that I think has some pretty declarative statements in it.
Oh, it did.
Yeah,
sure.
and we can use that to kind of guide our thinking on this stuff, but it's not like a law that was passed by Congress. It's not a judicial ruling. So yeah, so I guess why is it meaningful and why does it matter, I guess, that this report even made it change the...
Other than a court, they're the final arbiter. Trademark Office says, no, you can't trademark this. I mean, you can't copyright this. You can't. Unless you go to court and say it was a wrongful rejection and I should be entitled to copyright protection. So I think ultimately it's going to end up in court.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you had to guess, let's say the case, because this is going to happen, right? Is somebody creates a song that they say is they made it. Mm-hmm. The office disagrees and says no, an AI generated that, and then it goes to court. I don't know. How do you think? Do you think it's going to be so fact specific that you're never going to get a? That's my concern. Sure.
It's going to be expert witnesses, like in an infringement case, where one side says this is not infringement on that song, and the other side says it is. And the jury goes, I think it is, because I was convinced by that expert witness that it was infringement. So I think it's going to ultimately come to guys like you, weighing in on, is this AI or is it not, or is there substantial or not? It's going to be all those issues.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's going to come to it at some point.
Yeah, I think which AI they used and how, I don't know. This case by case thing just really, like I said before, I think it's a great time to be a copyright attorney because there's just so much in here that's still a huge open question in my mind.
Infringement cases are case by case, song by song.
Right, sure. Yeah, like the Ed Sheeran case.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I did a podcast about that.
Right.
Yeah. So, it's going to end up in court. I just don't think any hard and fast rules will work. I think it has to be like infringement, case by case.
Yeah. Yeah.
Here's what I did. Here's what the machine did. And this is the result. And I feel like my contribution was substantial. And that should be enough to let me copyright it. So we'll see.
That is the word of the day, isn't it?
Yep.
It's these substantial contributions. For the artists listening, that's your guidance. And that's kind of what the Copyright Office is saying here. Yeah. You're probably safe if there's substantial human involvement.
But
that feels like a pretty good.
Give you exactly what that means.
Right. Yeah. We can't tell you what that means. That's such a lawyer answer too. We can't tell you what it means, but we can tell you that if it was substantial, then you should probably get a copyright unless they reject it, in which case we're going to have to go to a judge.
Right. All right.
Cool. Well, look, I think at least for the products that we build, and we've always built our products, I think, around what's normal, right? Around the existing current thinking, and that as that thinking has evolved, we've evolved our products. I think that people are safe to use LoopMagic to create composite pieces of audio, to piece them together in their work that are larger. This thing is, as long as it's not generating, every aspect of the song, I think they're probably pretty safe.
I do.
Sounds like you agree with that. Yeah, great.
Yep.
And from there, we'll just have to see how these things about fair use play out, how some of these court cases about the infringement play out as it pertains to AI models. And I am so curious to see who brings the first case about, around these guidelines, if they end up rejecting some sort of
going to be interesting
claim.
It's going to be more and more as time goes by. It's going to be very commonplace. Most musicians don't realize that they're probably not going to be creating music without AI in a few years.
I would definitely agree. I mean, we've seen it's amazing to see what great producers, the top producers in the world, can do with this technology.
Do you know Digitrax? A company?
Of course, for sure.
They created their AI only for the use of producers.
Sure.
Making records,
totally.
To use as a tool. And I think that's going to be very commonplace.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Before we go, could you tell our viewers more about Boomy and how they can get started with your AI-powered music creation?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. In terms of getting started with Boomy, I would say it depends on what level of musician you are. If you're somebody who wants to start from almost completed work and get it to it and sort of define inputs, then Boomy.com is for you. It's available for free. You can come in, create songs, even if you're just a sort of starting musician or know very basic things. You can you can produce music there. And then if you're somebody who's a professional, which is probably more of your listeners, if you're a producer, particularly if you're creating hip hop, electronic, or any modern genres, would really encourage you to check out LoopMagic, loopmagic.com, sign up and start prompting loops, samples, one shots. You know what these are. If you're a producer, it's a obvious part of every producer's workflow today. And instead of going out and buying the same sample pack that everybody else is using, everything that comes out of this model is unique. Everything that comes out of this model has been cleared, and all the training data has been cleared. so you can feel safe that you're not going to run into any of these infringement issues. And frankly, it just sounds incredible. Like one producer told us, it's too good. So hopefully, so if you're producing music, I think you're crazy for not trying this thing out. And so yeah, go check out LoopMagic. We're super excited about it. And yeah, Alan, thanks so much for this thoughtful conversation, for being so thoughtful on these issues. I doubt this is the last time we're going to be talking about this.
I agree. Great.
As things evolve. So happy to come back anytime.
And any musicians, producers, labels, composers, any issues, any questions, I'm available. For more detailed information and practical tips, we've prepared a free guide on navigating AI and copyright issues. You can download your copy in the link below. Stay informed, stay creative, and protect your work. Thank you, Alex, for sharing your valuable insights today. It's been a pleasure having you on.
Thanks so much, Alan.